Yeah. So I guess arguably one of the most important models in algorithmic mechanism design is that of combinatorial auctions, where you have m items for sale to n bidders, and each bidder has some arbitrary combinatorial valuation, which gives him for each bundle of items S, what is his valuation for this set of items. Typically, work in algorithmic mechanism design will assume that these valuations have some satisfy some complement-free condition, such as being submodular or being subadditive. In general, that you have decreasing marginals in getting more and more items. And you will also assume that the players, when they are allocated some item SI and they're asked to make some payment PI, their value has this quasi-linear form, which is their value for the set that they got minus the payment. And the objective of the auctioneer is to maximize the welfare, which is simply the total value of the partition of the items that he decided to make. The problem being that these values are only known privately to the bidders and not known to the auctioneer. So we need to deal both with the computation and with the incentive problem here. From an economic point of view, this has a very long history. The classical mechanism of Vickrey, Clarkson, Gross says that manages to achieve almost a perfect mechanism, which says that you can have a mechanism that completely maximizes social welfare, that fully maximizes social welfare, and also incentivizes the players to report their valuations truthfully. But if you look at it from a computer science perspective, this has too much communication burden. You need to transmit the whole valuation. The players need to transmit their whole valuation to the auctioneer. And also, it requires from the mechanism to be able to completely solve the social welfare maximization problem, which we know to be NP hard. So a long line of work, starting from the early work of Noam and Ronan, is sort of trying to address this question from a computational point of view, also requiring that the mechanism that you're going to run is also computationally efficient, and that you also don't have a lot of communication by assuming that the value is given to you either via a demand query protocol or a value query protocol. After a long history in algorithmic mechanism design, sort of the state of the art of the results that we have is through a recent paper of Sahar, which shows that there exists a square root log m, approximately optimal truthful mechanism when you assume that you have demand query access to the valuations of the players, and when the players have valuations that come from a class of valuations called XOS, which is a superset of submodular valuations. Well, if you're interested in only guarantees in expectation, and you know the distributions from which the values of the players are drawn from, recent work by Feldman et al. Also shows that you can get a constant factor approximation. But in this ex post situation where you don't make any distributional assumptions, the best that we can hope for in truthful mechanism design is stuck at this logarithmic barrier. Meanwhile, in another frontier of algorithmic mechanism design, we know that many combinatorial auctions are very widely appearing in practice. We have Google or Microsoft or Bing selling auctions in online systems through the use of very simple auction forms, or eBay through the use of very simple auction rules. And typically the mechanisms that are used in practice are far from being truthful, and instead they sort of like more give value to simplicity. So another line of work addresses how well do these more practical and simple auction designs perform in theory, and can we give worst case guarantees? One of the most, one stylized model of a simple auction design for the combinatorial auction setting, which has been very well studied in the algorithmic mechanism design community, is that of simultaneous second price auctions, where you are going to assume that each individual item is going to be sold via a single item auction, a single item second price auction simultaneously. So the bidders are going to simultaneously submit a bid at each of these auctions, and then the highest bidder locally at each auction is going to win, and he's going to pay the second highest bid. The pros of this mechanism design rule is that it's easy to describe, it's simple in design and distributed, and it's also prevalent in practice where you have multiple items being sold separately via the use of some local auction. The cons, though, is that bidders in these non-truthful mechanisms are facing a much more complicated optimization problem. Unlike truthful mechanism design, where they have sort of like a very simple behavioral rule that just report your value truthfully, here they need to optimize over these possible bids that they can submit to each individual auction. And so it's a question what behavioral assumption we should make when we're analyzing the efficiency of these simple auctions under strategic behavior. Most of the literature has looked at learning bidder behavior, primarily motivated by the fact that the Nash equilibria of these non-truthful mechanisms are hard to compute, and there are no good decentralized dynamics that converge to them. And also the fact that even from data sets from these online auction platforms, we know that people are not playing some stationary behavior, but rather are using some sort of dynamic learning rule. And so a natural approach is to try to analyze the efficiency of these simple non-truthful auction schemes at out of equilibrium learning outcomes. The most commonly used learning assumption in this literature is that of no-regret learning, where basically you assume that each person in this, you assume that this auction is going to be repeated again and again, and at every iteration each person is going to submit a bid or an action based on some learning algorithm which is going to satisfy the no-regret condition, which basically says that your learning algorithm should achieve an average utility which is at least as large as the average utility of the fixed bid vector of any fixed bid vector in hindsight. And the nice thing with these no-regret rules is that there are many simple algorithms that can guarantee these no-regret conditions, such as multiplicative weight updates or hedge. And so this sort of makes it natural to try to analyze the efficiency of these simple auction formats under such no-regret learning assumptions. And a long line of work has showed that the average welfare of such simple decentralized auction formats is actually giving constant factor approximations in such combinatorial auction settings, even for a large class of subadditive valuations, which is even a superset of XOS valuations. And so this seems to be sort of like even better than the logarithmic barrier that we were facing when trying to design truthful mechanisms. So here's sort of like the picture that we have currently. We know that for very simple formats, computing the VCGs runs in polynomial time, so we can do it easily. When we go up to XOS valuations, there's a logarithmic barrier to truthful mechanism design, and there's also like constant approximations if you want to go into the distributional settings. But for the even larger class of subadditive valuations, very simple auction rules give you constant approximations under such no-regret learning outcomes. But there is a catch in the following. Even though there are many simple learning algorithms that achieve the no-regret property, most of these learning algorithms do not work well when the actions that the player is learning over is very large. And so, for example, in a simultaneous second price auction, the number of possible actions that the player can submit to the auction is exponential in the number of items. Even if you could just submit high or low at each individual auction, the number of possible actions that you can, the bid vectors that you can submit is 2 to the m. And many of these simple no-regret learning algorithms, such as the multiplicative weight updates, even though they achieve good regret rates, the amount of computation that they need to do at every iteration is linear in the number of actions over which you're learning over. And so the amount of computation that each of these standard no-regret learning algorithms requires is exponential in the representation of the game. So we sort of like, even though we're getting constant factor approximations through these simple auction formats, and in a robust manner under learning algorithms, we've pushed sort of like the computational complexity to the side of the players. So a good question is, an open question sort of, in this area is, can we achieve the polynomial regret rates in such simple auction rules with also polynomial amount of computation at every iteration? So are there efficient no-regret learning algorithms in simple auction formats such as the simultaneous item auctions? And this sort of is the main motivation of this work, where we're asking these two simple questions. Is computational efficient no-regret possible in simple auctions for complement-free bidders? And if it's not, then how good social welfare should we expect from such simple auctions when we run them in practice? And in particular, throughout the talk, I'm going to be focusing on simultaneous second price auctions, but a lot of the results also carry over to other auction formats, and we present them in the full version of the paper. So here's our main results. We saw that there does not exist a computationally efficient no-regret learning algorithm for simultaneous second price auctions, even for this very small class of unit demand bidders. These are bidders that only want one item, and actually they have the same value for all the items. On the other hand, so this sort of says that we cannot hope for some way to bypass this exponential blow-up on the number of actions when we're focusing on no-regret learning outcomes. On the other hand, we show that if we slightly relax the no-regret guarantee to another sort of learning guarantee, which we call no-envy, then we can achieve no-envy learning in a computationally efficient manner in the simultaneous second price auctions. And we also show that such no-envy learning outcomes are still approximately efficient, even for XOS bidders. So if you believe in this bigger set of if you believe in this larger class of behavioral assumptions, and you believe that players are going to arrive to them, then we recover the constant factor approximation of the simple auction formats, and also in an algorithmic polynomial time manner. En route to proving these two results, we also have some more general results that might be of appeal to settings outside of mechanism design and auction theory. For example, in proving our hardness result, our impossibility result for no-regret learning, we give a generic way of proving impossibility results for no-regret learning by reducing it to an NP hardness result of some offline problem. And when proving that there exist computationally efficient no-envy learning algorithms, we give sort of a generic way of building efficient learning algorithms when you have exponential action spaces. So let me now go into a bit of how we prove these results and some of the details of each of these results. So why is no-regret learning hard and why is it impossible? Just look at even the simpler problem of computing the best fixed bid in hindsight. So no-regret learning sort of asks from the players to submit a bid at every iteration such that they compete with the best fixed bid in hindsight. But for now, let's just look at the problem of computing what is the best fixed bid in hindsight. This problem sort of asks, suppose that I'm given a distribution over prices, which is the historical distribution of prices in the past, then find me a bid vector for each of these items that I'm bidding on that maximizes my utility. And observe that at every item you're going to win if the price on this item is below your bid, and you're going to pay the price. And then your value is going to be the expected value of the items that you win minus the total price of the items that you win. Now we saw that this simpler problem is actually NP hard to compute. Finding the best fixed bid vector is NP hard to compute, even for unit demand valuations, and even up to some good additive approximation. And then we give a generic reduction that says that if this problem of computing the best bid in hindsight is NP hard, up to some additive approximation, then you cannot have an efficient no-regret learning algorithm. And so in some sense, we show that if you show a hardness of one step of a specific algorithm, which is this follow the leader algorithm, which just plays the best in hindsight at every iteration, then this also implies that there does not exist any efficient no-regret learning algorithm. So now let me move on to the positive result of the paper, where we're introducing this notion of no-envy learning, which is a sort of like a relaxation of the no-regret learning guarantee. Let me compare the two concepts, what is no-envy versus no-regret learning. So when you're trying to learn in such a simultaneous second price auction, you can think of it from the perspective of a single player. At every iteration, you're being given a vector of prices which are going to be implied by the bids of the other players. So the price on each item is the highest bid of any other player. But you don't know the prices that are going to come every day, so these prices are coming sort of in an online manner. No regret asks you to compete with the best fixed bid in hindsight, while no envy sort of asks you to compete with the utility from winning a fixed set in hindsight, a fixed set of items. So more concretely, if you denote here with ST of some bid to be the set of items that you win if you submit some fixed bid BI times step T, then no regret asks you to have an average utility that is at least the average utility you could have won if at every iteration you submitted a fixed bid and you won the set of that corresponds to that fixed bid minus the prices at time t of the set that you would have won at that time t. While NoEnvy instead asks not competing with a fixed bid, but rather keep the set fixed at every iteration. Just let's try to win the same set at every iteration. And so you should at least have average utility that is at least the maximum overall possible sets of the value for that set minus the average price of that set. And in fact, we can show that for the case of simultaneous second price auctions, the NoEnvy learning guarantee is a relaxation of the no regret guarantee. So if you manage to achieve no regret, then you also achieve NoEnvy. And so this is a larger set of outcomes. But why are they interesting? First of all, they have some sort of like Walrasian interpretation of them, that you do not envy any other set at the current price of that set. But also they sort of give more of a, they have very nice computational properties without losing a lot of robustness in terms of welfare guarantees. And so specifically, the theorem that we show is that if you have bidders that have XOS valuations and they're participating in simultaneous second price auctions, then there exists a polynomial time NoEnvy learning algorithm that guarantees this property minus an error term that also depends polynomially in the number of items. And this guarantee holds even if the sequence of prices or highest other bids that the player observes is drawn adversarial at every iteration. And the algorithm runs in polynomial time, and at every iteration is going to make a demand query to the valuation. Moreover, the algorithm that we construct also guarantees that no player ever bids above his valuation for any set. And then we also show that if you have if in a simultaneous second price auction, all bidders use some no overbidding, such a no overbidding, NoEnvy learning algorithm, then the average welfare of any such sequence is at least half of the optimal welfare. So pictorially, no regret learning outcomes are outcomes that have good welfare, but they admit no efficient learning algorithm that converges to them, while NoEnvy learning outcomes still maintain the one half approximate efficiency, but now they admit decentralized dynamics that converge to them. Now, how would you, let me go into how do we achieve this efficient NoEnvy learning. Our approach is the following. We reduce the NoEnvy problem into a no regret problem when the actions of the players are sets. And this is based on the specific rules of the auction. And then we try to construct a no regret algorithm when you're learning over sets rather than over bid vectors. You still have the problem that the number of sets, the number of actions that you have is still exponential in M. So it's still not clear how a standard learning algorithm would perform. If you try to run multiplicative weight updates here, this wouldn't work. But the nice thing is that unlike the no regret problem, if you look here at the hindsight optimal set problem, then this simply corresponds to running a demand query where the price of each item is the average price in hindsight. So this sort of tells you why the NoEnvy problem, the no regret problem that we're facing here is sort of like easier than the original no regret problem, because now we can at least solve the hindsight problem. And so the question is, how do we go from being able to solve the hindsight problem to actually having an online learning algorithm for it? And for this, we use a generic style of algorithms which are called follow the perturb leader. And we actually generalize the regimes in which this follow the perturb leader algorithms work to go beyond the linear objectives that they used to apply from the work of Kalaev and Bepala. And generically, what we will do is we will add some random fake history to the past that we observe, and then we will call the optimal in hindsight oracle with this augmented fake history and play according to this output. So we're sort of perturbing the history and playing according to the best in hindsight with this perturbed history. And this approach is not specific to simultaneous second price auctions. We give other applications of this style of algorithms that we develop beyond the auction settings. But for simultaneous second price auctions, the noise, the fake history that you need to add and then call your demand oracle is simply of the form that you're going to augment the price history with an extra random price on each item, where this random price is drawn from an exponential distribution. So instead of playing the best set in hindsight for the actual average prices, you're going to add another random price on each item, and then you're going to pick the best set at every iteration that corresponds to these perturbed average prices. And picking such a set is going to give you a no-regret guarantee for this reduced problem. Apart from analyzing achieving the no-envy property for XOS valuations with demand queries, we also address the question of what can you do when you have only value query access to your valuation. And we saw that for the smaller class of coverage valuations, you can achieve an approximate version of the no-envy guarantee with only value query access via reduction to online convex optimization. We also saw that you can achieve the no-envy guarantee for many other simple auction formats that were analyzed in the Price of Anarchy for Auctions literature via the smoothness paradigm. And we also give applications of our generic follow the perturbed leader algorithm to settings outside of auctions, such as security games and other settings where the learner is learning over infinite action spaces. So to summarize how the picture looks and how our paper fits in the existing literature, we're showing that even though we have constant factor approximation guarantees for simultaneous second price auctions, even for sub-additive valuations, and even for no-regret learning outcomes, computing or like having such no-regret learning outcomes are intractable even for unit demand valuations. Oops, so this would have been unit demand. But for the very large class of XOS valuations, our new concept of no-envy learning is tractable and maintains the same constant factor approximation guarantees as no-regret learning outcomes. So with that, let me summarize that even though a Price of Anarchy analysis of auctions has given a lot of very neat results on the approximate efficiency of non-truthful simple auctions, the tractability of no-regret learning in such simple auction formats is not so clear, and especially when the action space that the auction format has is exponential in its representation. And so we saw one such setting where you cannot do efficient no-regret learning, and we propose a new concept of learning in auctions that has all the nice properties that you would want from a learning concept. Thank you. Not always. You have to find a distribution that implies some sort of like conditions on the behavior of the algorithm between two iterations, some stability condition. If you can show that such a distribution exists of perturbations, then it's implied. Otherwise, yeah. We couldn't do it here, but we have some new results that it seems possible. But observe that the best in hindsight, even when you have demand queries, which is for unit demand you have, it's a much harder problem.